Plessy versus Ferguson. In 1896, the Supreme Court case of Plessy versus Ferguson tested the validity of Jim Crow laws. The case involved an incident in which Homer Plessy, who was part African American, refused to move from his first-class seat to a segregated section of a Louisiana passenger train. Authorities arrested him, charging him with violating the Louisiana law segregating trains, and convicted and sentenced him to 20 days in jail or a fine of $25. Plessy, who believed that the 14th Amendment guaranteed him equal protection under law, appealed his conviction to the United States Supreme Court. The Plessy decision affirmed the separate but equal facility rule of the Jim Crow laws. In the 8-1 decision, the court noted that while the 14th Amendment may have been designed to enforce the absolute equality of the two races before the law, it did not mandate social equality. The majority opinion went on to note that laws permitting and even requiring blacks and whites separation in places where they are liable to be brought into contact do not necessarily imply the inferiority of either race to the other. Only Justice John Marshall Harlan dissented. In one memorable opinion, Harlan wrote, "But in view of the Constitution, in the eye of the law, there is in this country no superior, dominant ruling class of citizens. Our Constitution is colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens. In respect of civil rights, all citizens are equal before the law." Harlan's dissent notwithstanding, the Plessy decision maintained the separate but equal doctrine of Jim Crow laws. For nearly a half-century, Southern states continued to discriminate against African Americans with the approval of the United States Supreme Court. Washington versus Du Bois. Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois both were considered leaders in the late 19th century civil rights movement. However, they disagree with one another substantially on how African Americans could achieve racial equality. Washington, the founder of the Tuskegee Institute, believed that blacks needed to first acquire labor skills in order to become equal. In his words, "No race can prosper until it learns that there is as much dignity in tilling a field as in writing a poem." Du Bois, the first black awarded a doctorate from Harvard University, strongly disagreed with Washington. He contended that blacks should seek a liberal arts education in order to cultivate a group of well-educated leaders, whom he labeled the talented 10th, a necessity for gaining acceptance into mainstream American life. In 1909, Du Bois became one of several national civil rights leaders who established the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. The New Deal and Civil Rights. As president during the Great Depression and World War II, Franklin D. Roosevelt cut a wide swath through the history of the period. However, FDR's record regarding civil rights is at best mixed. He rarely supported civil rights legislation, especially laws that would have made lynching a federal crime. FDR did not support expansive civil rights legislation, primarily because he needed the votes of white Southern Democrats in order to maintain his New Deal coalition. To push for civil rights for African Americans might have cost him support for New Deal legislation or even the presidency. Several seminal New Deal agencies also tended to discriminate against blacks. New Deal make-work programs tended to pay black laborers less and also gave preferential treatment to white applicants. Tenant farmers and sharecroppers fought back by forming groups such as the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, which worked to protect rights of these groups. On a side note, the Southern Tenant Farmers Union is highlighted in the film The Great Debaters, which will be shown during African American History Month later in February. A. Philip Randolph, president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, planned to highlight the lack of civil rights legislation with a march on Washington made up of various civil rights groups. Only after FDR promised to increase employment opportunities for minorities in wartime industrial plants did Randolph call off the march. Eleanor Roosevelt. While President Roosevelt seemed reluctant to take a strong civil rights stand, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt did not have similar reservations. Famous for her beliefs regarding human rights and civil liberties, she became a tireless crusader to better the lives of minorities, even after the death of her husband. Although FDR believed that supporting an anti-lynching law would be detrimental politically, Mrs. Roosevelt actively spoke in favor of the bill. She also met with various civil rights groups as well as NAACP committees and prodded New Deal and military officials to ensure equal treatment for and fair dealings with minorities. In addition, Eleanor became a close friend and collaborator with National Youth Administration official Mary McLeod Bethune and members of the Black Cabinet, which were lower-level African-American New Deal officials who channeled civil rights concerns through Eleanor to her husband. Eleanor also supported African-Americans who had helped shape her beliefs regarding civil rights, such as Pauli Murray, with whom she helped establish National Sharecroppers Week, as well as the Committee to Abolish the Poll Tax. In 1939, Eleanor resigned her membership in the Daughters of the American Revolution when the DAR refused Black opera star Marian Anderson the opportunity to sing at Washington, D.C.'s Constitution Hall. While many civil rights groups praised Eleanor's outspoken views on civil rights, some whites, such as FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, strongly criticized her, even suggesting that she had black blood. Her concern and involvement in civil rights causes continued throughout her time as First Lady and after her husband's death in 1945, and she continued to speak out in favor of causes through the 1950s, such as when she criticized Kennedy administration officials for not supporting the Freedom Rides in the early 1960s. Blacks in World War II. As was the case during the Civil War, African Americans felt they could make major contributions during World War II. Although the armed forces were segregated during the war years, more than 1 million blacks joined the service and fought in the war. Most black troops found themselves assigned to menial jobs, working as truck drivers or cooks. In other instances, they received extremely hazardous non-military duties, such as loading ammunition onto ships. Tragedy occurred at Port Chicago, California, in 1944. Black sailors who had been trained only how to load cargo and not munitions were pressured to load ships faster, and a mishap resulted in an explosion. Nearly 320 black soldiers died in the blast, some 15% of the total number of African American servicemen killed in World War II. Remaining black troops stationed at Port Chicago refused to continue loading ammunition, and the Navy court-martialed more 200 on charges ranging from disobeying orders all the way to mutiny. The final Port Chicago defendants were finally pardoned in the mid-1990s. However, many African-American units became known for their valor and meritorious service during the war, including the famed Tuskegee Airmen. Trained as fighter pilots at the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, they were assigned bomber escort duty in the Italian and North Africa campaigns. Over 450 pilots who trained at Tuskegee flew missions, destroying over 260 enemy aircraft and winning more than 850 medals and commendations. Several other African-American regiments surpassed many white ones in the number of citations for their received for distinguished service during World War II. In an attempt to stop a march on Washington scheduled by A. Philip Randolph, President Franklin Roosevelt approved the enlistment of African Americans in the Marine Corps. Many blacks saw themselves involved in a double V campaign, not only for victory against the Axis, but overcoming discrimination and prejudice at home as well. Desegregating the military. When some black veterans came home to the South after the war, they found themselves facing more danger than they had on the front lines. In February 1946, white policemen in South Carolina attacked and blinded ex-soldier Isaac Woodward. In July of that year, a white mob in Georgia dragged 2 black veterans and their wives from their car and shot them to death. Lynchings of ex-soldiers also took place that summer. When informed about the lynchings, President Truman reportedly exclaimed, "My God, I had no idea it was as terrible as that." He responded by creating the President's Committee on Civil Rights. The committee issued its report in October 1947 titled, "To Secure These Rights." The report condemned segregation in general, but specifically criticized segregation in the military. The committee recommended that the President and the government take action to end immediately all discrimination and segregation based on race, color, creed, or national origin in all branches of the armed services. Truman decided to try and accomplish this through executive action rather than push legislation through Congress. In February 1948, he took a tentative first step when he announced that he had instructed the Secretary of Defense to take steps to have the remaining instances of discrimination in the armed services eliminated as rapidly as possible. However, political concerns, namely a wish not to anger Southern Democrats so that he could get their support at the Democratic Convention, kept Truman officially ending segregation in the military until late July of that year. Executive Order 9981 stated, "It is hereby declared to be the policy of the President that there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin." Though integration in the armed forces went slowly, even at the end of the Korean War, 5% of Army soldiers still served in segregated units. It still represented an important step in the larger quest for full civil rights for African Americans.